Yeah! We made it. All right, we're back for the final assembly of our 2013 conference. And before we all disappear on summer vacation, I want to say don't let your mind board the plane before your body does, because we have an exciting assembly to share with you. And I'm really, really delighted and honored to invite Representative Kay Granger from the 12th Congressional District of Texas to the stage. Representative Granger serves on the Congressional Arts Caucus and has been a valued ally to many of the arts organizations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Please join me in welcoming Representative Granger to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon and welcome you to the final plenary session. Have you enjoyed this conference? Has it been good? Good. Well, good, because Texas is very much involved in the arts and very proud of our involvement in the arts, and so we're certainly glad to host you. I'm especially pleased to be joining you for a session on community engagement, because like theater, the world of politics is often faced with questions about how to better connect the community to our work, how to engage the next generation of patrons, and how to attract a new audience. I think one of the great community engagement hurdles the arts faces is the idea that the arts should be a luxury in life, an extracurricular activity. I've personally never subscribed to that idea, predominantly because struggling artists, not necessarily those leading lives of luxury, have created most of the history's purest works of art. When you think about it, inspirational works of visual art and poetry and music emerged from World War II concentration camps where prisoners barely had enough energy to find food and water. And some of the most moving pieces of gospel music were composed by slaves on American plantations. So even without money, without hope, without basic respect, we're still not without art. I also believe art is one of the most powerful tools we have to describe our history and convey our hopes for the future. Several years ago, I was seated at a table at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, and I frankly was eavesdropping on a conversation between Kay Fortson, whose family built the Kimball Art Museum, and Robert Edsel from Dallas. Robert was talking about a book he just had published. Through pictures and text, his book told the amazing story of World War II's monuments men. These were men and women who, while serving the military, saved and protected the art, paintings, books, statues from World War II all over Europe. They would have been lost without those wonderful men and women. If not for their efforts, those works of art would have been stolen or destroyed by the Nazis during the war. Defending the arts is something we've done a long time in my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. Our motto is Cowboys and Culture. It is, and we're proud of that because it really describes our unique mix. Thank you. I know you spent some time in Fort Worth, and I'm very, very glad you got to. But we look at our Western heritage and culture as something is important, and I know you know that we know that art is important. We're fortunate we don't need to rely on our computers, television, textbooks to view Picasso's paintings or access world-class theater or listen to classical music. We can find these works right in our own backyard in Fort Worth. The Modern Art Museum, the Eamon Carter Museum of American Art, the Kimball Art Museum. Each of those showcase some of the world's greatest works of visual art. Meanwhile, Casa Mañana has offered live professional theater in our community since it opened the first time in the mid-30s and has done a tremendous job of nurturing future generations of artists and patrons. We have theater groups all around the city, and those are growing in number every single year. And our community is also home to the Fort Worth Opera, which is one of the oldest opera companies in the country and the oldest in Texas. And I know you know about the Nancy Lee and Perry Bass Performance Hall, which provides a venue for world-class theater, opera, and classic music. As I speak today, Bass Performance Hall is hosting the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, which is one of the world's most prestigious classical music competitions. This contest was started by music teachers in Fort Worth a half-century ago to commemorate Van Cliburn's musical victory in Moscow during the height of the Cold War. His performance there gave a new confidence to the quality of American music making and began a new era of cultural relations between the East and the West. We lost Van just this year, and it's a huge loss to us all. These institutions and events have brought a depth to our city that's been absolutely critical to its growth. I know that because before I served in Congress, I served as Fort Worth's mayor. Quality of life doesn't just mean good roads and clean water. It means art, theater, and music. Part of changing, thank you. Part of changing the art is a luxury narrative includes the recognition that the importance of art is greater than an appreciation of theater, dance, or music. In our schools, art education improves all aspects of learning. Study after study shows that arts education fundamentally enhances the process of learning by improving our sensory, cognitive, and motor capabilities. Arts education curriculum also leads to better attendance and lower dropout rates in school. Art has always been a part of my life. Years ago, in another life, before politics, I was a high school teacher. I taught literature and journalism, sponsoring the yearbook and the school newspaper. It was a large high school, 2,700 students, and I had 1 hour a day in which to encourage, prod, and push kids into loving to learn like I did. Often it wasn't literature or math or history that kept them in school. It was the art class or photography or music or drama that kept them there and moved them. Some from that high school went on to a career on the stage, and others simply went on with their lives that had been enriched by their high school experiences. Evidence of the benefit of arts on school children is not simply anecdotal. There's a growing body of research that offers insight into the biological effects of art on the brain. Earlier this year, the Journal of Neuroscience published a study that found that children who practice music at a young age tend to have more white matter in the part of their brain responsible for connecting the right side to the left. That means the creative and the logical sides of the brain can better interact, creating a foundation upon which ongoing training can be built. In addition to academic success, an arts education provides emotional and social benefits for students. A theater in Chicago did a research project a few years back that asked students how theater impacted their lives. One student in Illinois explained how a chance encounter with a theater drama teacher guided him away from a schoolmate who later ended up in prison for murder. Another boy in Wisconsin shared that being in a school play after he immigrated to the United States helped him learn to speak English and interact with others. These studies and anecdotes have not fallen on deaf ears. I've been glad to see that there's a growing support in Washington and in state legislatures across the country to expand our education focus from STEM to STEAM. I'm glad I don't have to explain that to you because I am explaining it to members of Congress, I can assure you. In Fort Worth, that's an idea we've embraced for a long time. When Bass Performance Hall was being planned, the organizers made a concerted effort to ensure school children would benefit from this downtown asset. I lived just 2 blocks from the hall at the time, and I took tremendous pride in seeing school buses carrying children from all over Fort Worth to performances and rehearsals. Oftentimes, these were children who had never seen a theatrical performance and might never have if not for this program set up by the theater's founders, Nancy Lee and Perry Bass. I know a tremendous amount of focus is put on gaining ground for arts education in our schools, but our broader communities have a lot to gain as well. As America's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan winds down, thousands of soldiers have returned home and faced a new and different world than the one they left. Many carry home with them post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. Others return with devastating physical wounds. I'm proud of the growing partnership between Congress, the administration, and the arts community. This collaboration has enabled us to use painting, music, and theater in a therapeutic way for our American heroes. I'd like to personally thank the Theater Communications Group. As many of you may know, this organization has partnered with Blue Star Families to allow military personnel discounted and sometimes even complimentary admission to shows. Music Corps is another organization that's played a role. They've been working at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center to partner severely wounded soldiers with performers like Pink Floyd's Roger Waters and cellist Yo-Yo Ma. This program has helped countless severely wounded warriors, even some who faltered with conventional therapy. Art has the power to heal, to empower, to strengthen, to unite. It's a way of transforming our communities and lifting up those who are in greatest need. I'm so grateful to all the men and women who've invested in our arts industry. While the government only contributes a small portion compared to the generosity of non-governmental funders, the tight budget situation we face on the federal level will force Washington to further scale back funding for the arts. Over the course of the next year, pressure from constituents and new legal requirements will force lawmakers to make a lot of decisions about what gets funded and what doesn't. We'll be defining many of our national priorities and weighing the costs and benefits of every program to our constituents and to the country. As passionate participants in the theater industry, you're the strongest advocates for the arts and art education funding. Email your member of Congress. We read the emails. Send them a letter we can still read. Give a call to your state legislator and explain why the arts must be a priority and why it's of fundamental importance to you, your community, your state, and your country. Your voice matters, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to share it. Especially as Washington works to scale back spending, non-governmental funding will be more important than ever. It's extremely encouraging to see so many theater stakeholders in one room today, learning from each other and other members of the art industry about new ways to get their communities more involved and more invested in the theater. What you're learning in this room and what you're doing in the communities and teaching to our young people, how it has the power to absolutely transform the way our country perceives the arts. Because of your work, I look forward to an America where we actively look to raise the standards of artistic accomplishment, where we expand cultural opportunities in our communities, where we see theater, music, visual arts, not as luxuries, but as a requirement for our nation's continued success. Thank you for all you do to expand the arts, and thank you very much for asking me to speak with you this afternoon. I hope you've had a wonderful convention. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to get a copy of that. Okay. Wow. I think you all know how difficult it can be in Washington for the arts, and having someone like Representative Granger on the Hill representing us and speaking with that level of passion and knowledge about the impact of the arts is so valuable and so helpful to us. And I just want to reiterate what she said, which is that we need to be advocates for the arts in Washington, and there are ways to do that. TCG is a member of the Performing Arts Alliance. We're often sending you emails and asking you to write to your congresswoman or congressman, depending upon the issue and where you live. Please respond to those. It's really important. Your voice makes a difference. The other thing I just want to mention is that we do have an Advocacy Day every year in April, and a number of you come to Washington, and we sit and talk to our congresspeople. It's a lot of fun, face-to-face. There's nothing like the face-to-face, and I will just add that, talking about musicians and different artists who are getting very involved in advocacy, I got to watch in the Cannon office building Yo-Yo Ma and the former drummer for Guns N' Roses have a jam session. I also just want to talk about Margo Jones again, because she wrote, I believe passionately in art as a form of salvation, and that the things art brings, beauty and spiritual growth, are the most important things in human life. But she also wrote, I don't believe in dreams without action, so when these opportunities arise to advocate for the salvation of the arts, please act. Now, to better honor Margo Jones's founding spirit, we are for the first time presenting the new Visionary Leadership Award in honor of Margo Jones. Before I bring our presenter to the stage, I want to acknowledge that we have some Margo royalty in the house. Margo's niece, Judy Jones, is here with us today. Judy, can you raise your hand or stand or let us see where you are? We are so grateful that you're here to help us honor Margo's legacy. Now, to help us present this award, please join me in welcoming to the stage TCG board member and producing artistic director of Southern Rep, Aimée Hayes.
Thank you, Teresa. Visionary leadership requires a good measure of audacity to believe that a dream can, should, and must become a reality. But it also requires tenacity to survive the daily grind of late nights and early mornings, disappointments, and course adjustments along the way. Our recipient of the Visionary Leadership Award in honor of Margo Jones goes to someone who has audacity and tenacity to spare, Deborah Cullinan. Right? Yes. When Deborah applied for the position of executive director at San Francisco's Intersection for the Arts, the organization was in danger of closing. They took a chance on a 28-year-old visionary with little formal experience, and then watched as year by year she transformed the direction of her organization and the fabric of the community it served. And now, when you visit the Intersection for the Arts, you might take in the following: a visual arts exhibition responding to the violence of the drug wars, a jazz trio, a play performed by resident theater company Camposanto, a presentation on ants from an entomologist, or a cross-disciplinary project on wood waste between artists, research engineers, and someone from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But here's the thing, that broad diversity of programming is united by a singular faith in the art's capacity to animate and engage community and neighborhood spaces. A faith and diversity rooted in Deborah's own leadership, her visionary leadership, in the audacity and tenacity that she will bring to her newly announced position as executive director of the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Deborah Cullinan, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, I'm so glad to be here. It is truly, truly an honor to be receiving the first Margo Jones Award, and especially to be here with you, Judy, with all of us. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't be here at all if it weren't for a whole bunch of other people. I'm gonna name just a few, and I'm gonna miss a whole bunch. Obviously, Intersection for the Arts, which just celebrated its 48th birthday. You can clap. Yeah, good idea. Sean San Jose and Camposanto, John Moscone, Cal Shakes, and our beloved Triangle Lab project, and very soon my new home, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Margo Jones. Let's take a moment. I know you all have been talking about her a lot, but let's take a moment. This remarkable woman, she dreamed a movement into being, a movement driven by theaters that are rooted in their cities, in their communities. Theaters that value process as much as product. Theaters that nurture new voices and take great big risks. Theaters that link together across the country to create scale, opportunity, audience, and long life for artists and for the greatest stories of our times. I often hear Margo Jones referred to as a practical dreamer, a dreamer who acts. Mismatch words for a lot of us. We tend to think that one is either practical or a dreamer. And in fact, as we push forward into this new century, it is my belief that we must invoke a spirit of both, a spirit that does not think in either ors, but rather in ands. We must be dreamers and we must be practical. We can't be afraid to see the future, even if it is clearly asking us to change and it's terrifying. To continue this thriving movement, we must be hyperlocal and we must create global connection. We must be deeply rooted and reflective of our communities, and we must continue to make the most exceptional art that we can. We must create utterly engaging and participatory experiences, and we have to give artists the time and the space that they need to make the most powerful work. We must be vibrant places and civic assets, bringing our work out into the streets, collaborating with our neighbors, our policymakers, our community partners. We're gonna have to be messy, and we're gonna have to strive for perfection. We'll honor and share tradition while nurturing the culture bearers, the storytellers, and the style innovators of our day. We can't be afraid to change, to try, and to fail, just like Margo. And we can't think in terms of small or large, but in terms of a continuum of endless creativity. We have to be necessary to our communities, but not only to those who love theater, but to those who do not yet know its power. Together, we can define this next moment in this movement of American theater, bold and gigantic. And I'm sure this quote's been tossed around a lot over the weekend. But to create the theater of tomorrow, today, this has and always will be our charge. So thank you, Amelia and Teresa and TCG, and thank you all of you. I am so honored. Thank you, Margo.
Okay, thank you to both Aimée and Deborah. Intersection's work as a pioneer of arts and community development has been such an inspiration to us. I have no doubt that Margo Jones is looking down from somewhere and smiling. One of the most inspiring aspects of Intersection's work is their cross-disciplinary approach. And you heard Deborah talk about that a bit, and that spirit was very much on our minds as we brought together our final assembly. It's called Engagement Models from the Museum World. Our first of two speakers is Max Anderson, and he's the Eugene McDermott Director at the Dallas Museum of Art, but I also just learned that he is the grandson of Maxwell Anderson, the playwright, who won the Pulitzer, the Drama Critics Circle Award back in the 30s and 40s, wrote plays like Bad Seed and Key Largo. So it was fun to learn that about Max. But he's here to share his experience as the director of 5 museums and author of dozens of publications, including The Quality Instinct, Seeing Art Through a Museum Director's Eye. Please join me in welcoming Max Anderson to the stage. Thank you. Okay. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Teresa. Thanks, everybody, for coming this afternoon to hear 2 museum directors. And you may have expected with Nina and myself, we have 2 very different animals, but actually there's a lot more in common between her smaller institution and our larger one, which is at the end of Flora Street, the Dallas Museum of Art, in that we're both very unsatisfied with convention. And I've spent quite a few years thinking about some of the conventions that museums observe, which I hope will be relevant for theaters, and we'll find out the hard way during the Q&A. So So the Dallas Museum of Art is down the street. How many of you got there during this conference? Please raise your hand, even if not. Thank you. That's great. We are blessed and cursed with a lot of bounty, the largest art museum in North Texas, and it was great to hear Representative Granger talk about our friends and cousins in Fort Worth, which has a fantastic museum district as well. And we are having our big conference a year from now, the Association of Art Museum Directors, with the 200 directors of the biggest art museums coming to town. So we'll be sharing that opportunity with Fort Worth in the next year. We celebrated our 110th anniversary this year, which is hard to keep fresh, but we're doing our best. And we are a museum supported by the City of Dallas. The city owns our building and provides happily the costs of so much of what the museum requires. But here's what we're not. We're not a tourist destination. And it's kind of staggering to think there's $1 billion of infrastructure on this street built in the last many years to create a harbinger of culture and an opportunity to welcome people who live here and visit here. But for the time being, Dallas, although we're the 4th biggest metropolitan area in the United States with Fort Worth, is not a tourist destination. We have 6 million people in the catchment, in the basin of potential visitors who live here, and within 15 years we'll outpace Chicagoland as the 3rd biggest metropolitan area in the United States, with the fastest growing area here in the country. But we're still, apart from your being here, not a tourist destination. And part of the challenge we face is to make ourselves relevant to potential visitors. Yesterday morning I got back from a 10-hour flight from Sao Paulo with Mayor Rawlings and Mayor Price, who came down from Fort Worth and Dallas to help make a case for Dallas-Fort Worth as a place of investment in culture and in business. And what's striking to me is how much work we have ahead of us. But by virtue of that, when we look at the challenges we face in this institution, we have a pretty big budget of over $23 million. And what separates us from theaters and smaller institutions is that we have this manifold mission, like most big art museums. Research, meaning taking care of scholars and making sure they're well fed and not too ornery, so they can carry on original research on works in the collection and exhibitions. Obviously, the securing the works in our collection, and the possibility of maintaining a physical plant that's 1/3 square feet with all that comes with that. Conservation of our collection, which requires expertise in scientific and technical ways, ensuring that collection, and keeping 250 or so staff people happy and fed as well. But the other thing we've been embarked upon since I got here a year and a half ago as director was to look at public participation, which is to balance all of the weighty obligations that come on our shoulders in caring for a major collection, in looking to the presentation of it as a scholarly resource for people here and around the world, but also thinking about what it means to be a public institution in a city that lacks tourism. So one thing you can say about museums around the country is that the census shows only about 14.5% of American adults visit the museums of our country in the last year. And that's the data point. And in terms of our local audience, we might draw annually as few as 500,000 this year, over 600,000 visitors, which is only 8% of the public that is available to us. So we have a big challenge going forward to think about mounting our relevance in the face of all the other ways people can spend their time in this area. What we decided to do was to drop our admission charge. Seemed like a pretty simple idea. I'd done it before at another museum, and lo and behold, more people show up. It's the most amazing thing. And as a result, we've gone through a major change since January of this year. The calculation I brought to the Board of Trustees was comparable to the calculation one can make everywhere in the United States where there is not a tourist mecca, meaning New York and San Francisco in particular. And what I showed them was that admissions income, general admissions, was only reaping about $600,000 a year, or 2.7% of our budget, so there's risk in doing away with that. The more radical step was to introduce free membership, which you think membership sounds like something you earn money with, but I was pointing out that, as with most other museums, under $100, a membership actually ends up costing museums money. The cost of servicing those members, the staff that's required, the events, the foregone opportunity cost of tickets sold, ends up meaning, again, about 2.7% of our budget. And the anecdote I gave the board was, when a family shows up at our desk, and the first question they're asked is, "Are you a member?" What they're really hearing is, "Do you belong here?" What makes you think you belong here? So we said, well, let's make, as long as admission's going free, what the hell, let's make membership free. And the challenge to the board was, all we have to do is find 5% more of our operating revenues. And the question to them was, are we 5% more compelling if we go free? So what that required from us was a wholesale rethinking of the culture of the museum, because it's not only a matter of becoming free, it's also reorienting how the staff interacts with the public and how we create messages and they're received by our visitors. Because in the end, when we use this word engagement, it can mean that. It can certainly mean, on a smaller frontier, people who are not really connected coming into touch with each other. But in our case, with 600,000 visits a year, it's a much more complicated thing to structure engagement with all of those people. So what we've done in the last many years before I got here was to build a Center for Creative Connections, which is a fantastic interactive space for families to come, make art, learn about art, be among original masterworks in an education center, which is an unusual thing. Most often, the only thing you find in education centers is tables and origami and scissors and glue. But we actually hang works by great modern masters in and around the works that the kids and families are making. We also create opportunities for, obviously, performance, live jazz, music around and in the galleries, and a sense of play and opportunity for that is enhanced only by the creation of the big public park in front of us, which was built just last year. And it's a little strange. Normally, art museums grow up in parks, and in our case, somebody put a park in front of the museum last year. It was very considerate, and we're certainly using it to our fullest advantage. At the core, a lot of what we want to encourage, though, is the contemplation of works in our collection. And contemplation is an old-fashioned word, but in effect, they're so easy to have museums today that are consumed entirely by activities and events and fun and music and food and laughter, and nobody's looking at the art. So we are trying to figure out ways to incentivize a combination of social interaction and personal engagement in the museum's mission, but also a deepened understanding of the intentions of artists over the last 5 millennia across every continent. One thing that struck us by going free and opening ourselves to free membership was we actually needed to document what was happening. How were we changing? How is the museum going to be different in the future from its past? And anecdotal evidence is what most of us rely on. In the theater world, you have ticket sales, you have all sorts of census data that you use as we do, and you understand a bit more about your visitors because they generally come with a Visa card. When you go free, nobody has a Visa card anymore that we know of. Maybe they do, but we're not finding that out. So what we're trying to do is to measure what's happening to the institution as we go forward in this new program. Our deputy director, Rob Stein, likes to talk about a windsock, which you see over here on the right. And that's what measurement in many ways is around the quality of the experience of a museum. You can only measure anecdotally to some extent, but there must be some ways, and particular ways, of documenting that. What we've decided to do is really measure just a few things in these next years. One is the number of repeat visits. And what's important to recognize is that when the Metropolitan Museum, where I worked for 10 years, says they have 5 million visitors a year, it's not true. They have a few million, but a lot of them come every day or every week. And so that's the dirty little secret in our profession. Our 600,000 visits might only be 250,000 people. We don't know. We're going to start to find out, and we're going to try to encourage repeat attendance. We think that's a great marker. Another one is diversifying participation in every category, looking not just socioeconomically and ethnically at diversity, but also in terms of background and interest and experience, and find ways to measure that. We're also looking for increased affinity with what our mission is, that people can learn all the variety of the spectra in which we operate, whether it's collecting art, taking care of it, how it connects with history, with lessons around our collective humanity. And we also want to understand how going free can motivate action of different kinds, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So one thing we set about doing was creating a menu of experiences beyond that couple sitting in front of the painting, which, a Turner is very forgiving in many respects. It's a lively, buoyant experience, but lots of works of art are a bit impenetrable. So what we did is introduce something called DMA Friends. And you could go to sleep now and just go to dma.org/friends, and you'll find out all you need to know from here on out. We set up keypads, our iPads around the building with touchscreen access to information and the ability to configure your own new free membership. So people walk in the door and they're given an opportunity to join. American Airlines is headquartered in Dallas-Fort Worth, and we studied a bit the loyalty programs of airlines to try to understand how consumers in general are more accustomed to connecting with enterprises through loyalty programs than not. So we started this very intense, deeply researched approach, which you can't read, but it had to do with the flow of engagement, how we actually entice people's loyalty. And we ended up building this interface on an iPad, which allows you to walk up to a desk and you'll be greeted by someone cheerfully saying, "Are you a member? Would you like to be?" It's free and showing how. And basically it requires a cell phone number. That's your membership number. So if you lose your card, everything's going to be okay. And then also an email address if you're willing to do that. When you walk around the building, you take your card and present it in front of the iPad cameras around the building, and immediately you're given points. Every time you put the card in front of an iPad, you get points. So it's very Pavlovian. What happens is these people get their free card, and all of a sudden they're wandering around looking, where's my iPad phone that I can get some more points? And it's had the predicted response. We're very excited about it. Now when you have your card, you go up to these kiosks and put your card in front, you get an interface like this, which is your personal membership page. And you can get it off the web at home or at work, or you can do it in the museum. And it shows you what you've been doing, what experiences you've had, how often you've visited, and what you're doing in terms of rewards, because part of what we're showing also is that these points, of course, can be redeemed. And they can be redeemed for experiences far and wide, including tours of the storerooms, meeting a conservator, and the more generic stuff like free parking, free exhibition tickets, discounts in the store, discounts in the restaurant. And what we build is a series of badges, which are very popular now, as you know, on the web, where people can earn credits towards their being, in this case, an All-American, because they've been to the collections of American art, pre-Columbian art, and therefore they've earned their badge. And I know how important this can be. So here's a few other. There's the Globe Trekker, there's the Helping Hand, there's the Jazz Enthusiast, and all these different ways of reflecting the diversity of opportunities in the museum that people can have, which goes far beyond the experience of art in isolation. And then comes the rewards page, everybody's favorite page. And you see the number of points. It looks like an American Express rewards page or another one, and you can see all of the opportunities. Dismayingly, free parking is the #1 reward people want. But we're moving them towards the experiential side, including lunch with me, which is another option that's there. Nobody's wanted that yet. I'm not holding my breath. When you walk around the building, you're able to take your iPhone or your flip phone. It's not necessary. We don't use QR codes because we don't want to exclude people who don't have fancy smartphones. And you can just type in, as you see on the right, the code at the label, which is by the work of art or in the gallery. And as you see, thank you for checking in. You've been rewarded 150 points. And so it is truly a way of having this instant gratification that you're doing something, you are somewhere, and the deeper your experience, the deeper your commitment to the museum in some respect, the more points you're awarded. So if you write a blog post, forget about it. You're going to be rolling in points. That's just... The activity stream shows you what you've been up to, and it's meant to encourage people to see that if you do other things, you can get more points as well. So if this sounds manipulative, bear in mind, first of all, it's opt-in. You can walk in the museum, someone will eagerly try and get you to join, and if you wave them away, they'll stop bothering you. So it is truly an open platform for engagement. It's not an obligatory experience to join. But we're finding that the majority of people who walk in, once they see what it is and they're less threatened, want to participate. And obviously, the younger visitors are always helping the more senior visitors or the middle-aged figure it all out, which is part of our strategy around getting everybody involved. We launched on January 21st of this year and had a terrific response. Some of our staff are present on the floor all the time to train each other in making sure that good customer service is at the core of this and a welcoming face. And all of our security guards have had new uniforms now. They've gotten rid of their ties and blue jackets, and now they're open shirt, golf shirts with khakis, and it's a much more relaxed atmosphere. So I guess a reasonable question you might have is, so you've done all this stuff, is it working? And the best way to measure that is to start looking at some of the data. So we started January 21st. We've signed up 12,781 people as of yesterday. Bear in mind, the entire membership of the Guggenheim Museum in New York is about 9,000 people. So I teased the director of the Guggenheim and said, you know, we've added more members in 4 months than you have. And he lamented that 85% of the Guggenheim's visitors are tourists who come once and never again. And he's very eager to see this kind of program for New Yorkers who apparently ignore the Guggenheim in droves. So we're going to be working on that problem. You also see below the number of visits are changing, and below you see how many points we've given in. Our chief financial officer loves this. 14 million points have been given away. So we'll be bankrupt next year. But it's been fun, and I've learned a lot. If you've got that many thousands of people, how often are they coming? Well, this shows you that we've had over 18,000 visits. See, these aren't visitors, they're visits. So this is when the truth begins to hurt. And if I were to publish the data point and say we've had 18,000 visitors, I'd be lying through my teeth. And instead, what you see up there is the percent of repeat visits is 87% are not repeat visits, 6.8%. So what we want to do is drive that up. And there's a metric. We finally have a metric. We can say that's what we're trying to accomplish. This is what people do when they come to the museum as friends, DMA friends, and you see the pie chart. The vast majority, of course, visit the museum. More go to the European galleries, but I've got to tell you, it's neck and neck with the Asian galleries, and our curators are very nervously watching this. Because in the past, what did a curator do? They wrote a label, they stuck it on the wall, and they went back to their office. Now they're on the web, checking, am I going to beat out the American galleries? Why are the Pacific Asian galleries booming? What's going on here? So it's very exciting to see this horse race now happening on our professional staff. Now, Partners is another piece of this. Partners is a membership program, but you pay for it, and you pay $100 or more. And at the bottom, you see only 8% of our new 12,000, 13,000 friends were previously paying us. There's a certain percentage who have stopped paying us, which gave my board conniption fits until I explained that the under $100 members, remember, they were costing us money. So these are called check-ins, and this is a chart that shows number of people who go to the number of places in the different parts of the museum. And in visit totals, you can see at the bottom here, these dots represent clusters of visitors, how many times they visited. The higher up in the bar graph, the more visits people have made. And these are actually individuals, these little blue dots. At the bottom line, the yellow is people who've come once. But you get to these points up here where people have come 60 times since January 21st. And the rewards that they're redeeming, as you can see here, free parking, discounts, and there is a class now that I'm teaching later this month, and people are starting to redeem points for that, which happily there's some content that people are grabbing onto. They're also commenting a lot on Twitter and Facebook about all of this, which we're monitoring to understand the general trends and how that's playing out. And here's a fellow who comes every day. He's a high school teacher, Bobby Kaufman. We asked him to blog for us about why on earth he came to the museum every day, and he was skewing our data. So he wrote this. And it turns out he's really not skewing the data. He's just sharing that he's a high school teacher who comes every day after school. He goes into the European galleries. He drinks in his favorite works of art, feels refreshed, and goes. It's the canonical hope that we have that people might take advantage of. And there's Bobby, right there. Yeah. So we track you, just bear in mind, but it's all opt-in, so don't worry. The other part of this is the paid part, and I'll hurry up so we get to Nina, but what we do is, of course, we continue to charge, and we charge people on a philanthropic basis. We ask them for their support to make free admission and free membership possible. And the development department has shifted its way of thinking. We're no longer looking at earned revenue, we're focusing on contributed revenue. Not membership, but philanthropy, and not consumers, but investors in the museum. And so the messages are changing to everybody's welcome and support of any kind helps present free membership and free admission. We also look at how we can treat people like donors, even if it's only $100, which to a lot of people is a massive amount of money. To others, it's a flea flicker in a city with 18 billionaires. So we have our challenges to build the sense of investment, but we're working hard on it. And we've started at $100, whereas most art museums have memberships that start at $35, $50. But our premise is that's all free now. You don't need to do anything. And we customize the benefits for individual patrons. They get to choose, again, as partners, what they'd like to have, what kind of interaction with the leadership of the museum they'd like to have. And we're also, of course, continuing with gifts that have a senior rate and gifts that are councils, which are our members. We have some members who are actually $250,000 members a year. So they actually get to choose what they want to do. That's okay by us. We also have this series of activities that are specific to the paid members that are essential in building that relationship on a deeper basis, because the core of our goal in support is philanthropy. And over time, in the last several months, what we did was to announce free admission, free membership at the end of November, launch dma.org. We had previously been dallasmuseumoFart.org. And it took a little while. We had to buy out from the Dayton Microcomputing Association in Ohio, and I tell you, the things directors do these days. And implementing this was, again, a major cultural shift, trying to get the whole staff to understand our collective responsibility around data management and learning about our visitors. And I'll close by just saying, what's happened is that our donors are responding to this very, very generously. We're tracking ahead of budget in the larger contributions, and we're seeing in our next chapter a series of analysis and performance metrics. We're going to build a balanced scorecard of the experience we offer, the qualitative experience of museums, the qualitative efforts in a character of opportunities. And what's next is this, that since we introduced this program, over 75 museums have said they'd like to do the same thing. We built the whole platform, open source, free software. We're going to give it away to any museum that wants it, and we're very excited about how this could actually change the field. Thank you.
So, big thank you to Max Anderson for sharing with us in such depth. You know, we've been walking around this arts district for the last three days or so, and to be able to learn more about one of the fine institutions here in Dallas is really wonderful. Our next speaker, Nina Simon. Nina has been called a museum visionary by Smithsonian Magazine and currently serves as the executive director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, where she led an institutional turnaround based on grassroots community participation. She is the author of The Participatory Museum and the popular Museum 2.0 blog. Please join me in welcoming Nina Simon to the stage.
Hey. Just a couple quick logistical things. First of all, if you want to download these slides later, that's the link, and that's my Twitter handle. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and always a pleasure to learn from people who are not in the same field as you. So I have felt that this morning. I hope you guys feel that this afternoon. And even though I wasn't able to be at the February convening, I want to talk today about revolution, and not just audience revolution, but overall revolution of our institutions, because that's something I've been undergoing and going under over the last couple of years as a director of a small museum in Santa Cruz, California. I just want to share with you today some of the things we've learned from that experience. I want to start by just being really honest about where I come from. Maybe if this clicker will click. How about it? Maybe not. Oh, there, okay, good, great, okay. Surprise. So I have worked my whole career in museums, but I did not grow up loving museums, loving the arts, feeling that this is where I needed to go. I come to this work as an activist. I come to this work as somebody who believes hugely in the potential of arts institutions to be community centers, to be places where cultural engagement really can change the conversations we have in our community and in our society. And I think, unfortunately, for the most case, we are not living up to that potential. And in my whole career, I've focused on how we can start to do that, how we can take those words in our vision statement and make them actual in the work that we do. And I think we all know that the reason that this drives some of us is because there are some serious problems we're impacted by in the field. You know, there are a lot of people who see our field and our industry trying this clicking thing. Should I do something else? Is there somebody How about the next slide? All right, great. There are a lot of people who see our organizations as elitist institutions, places that are for a certain kind of person of a certain kind of background, and I'll try it again, but how about that next slide? We'll just do this with the back. I don't even know who it is, but they're going to be great. And the public value of what we do is seen sometimes as a little suspect. What I've seen is that this is not just happening with activists and political cartoonists, it's happening with visitors as well. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, great. You know, we've all seen this data, right? Over the last 30 years that the audience for traditional arts is going down, even as creative participation is going up. People are more engaged with arts and culture than ever before, less, though, feeling that our places are the places where they want to have that engagement. And my museum in Santa Cruz was suffering from a very acute case of this when I came to be its director in May of 2011. We had had years of declining attendance, and we got to a place where we were about to close. When I walked in the door, we had two very big problems. The first was money. We didn't have any. I walked in, we had a week of cash in the bank, and we had $30,000 in unpaid bills. It was a mess. But the bigger problem we had was community relevance, because nobody cared. We knew that there was a small group of people who knew and loved and took care of our museum, but there was this huge community out there that didn't even know that we existed. And so we decided that to combat this, we had to undergo a revolution in how we did our work to be able to be successful. And our revolution really comes down to three things. I'm just going to stop holding this as if it does something. Okay, let's go next slide. Great. The first piece of this is about active, oh, go back. Sorry. Oh, this is going to be so frustrating, isn't it? We'll see if maybe we can negotiate this. The first part is about active participation, that we believe that art and history are something you do and make, not just something you learn about. And so we really focus on this idea that we want to be a place where you are engaged as an active participant in the art, in the culture that's going on. And for us, that means a shift, next slide, from a traditional model where we produce the content for people to a model. Go to the next one. You can't even see me, so I shouldn't even do this, but can you click it again? Okay, great. They're negotiating back there. To going to a model where we instead serve as this platform and this facilitator of relationships so that the people in our community with the creative skills, with the great stories to share, can use us as the facilitator of the conversations that they want to have. And that can mean things, go to the next slide. Like when you come in the front door and you're invited to share your ideas for how we can improve our museum. Next slide. Next slide, please. We invite people to use our space as a space where they can share their creative skills with each other. Next slide. We invite people to contribute actively to our exhibits. And most importantly, we really focus on being a platform for the incredible creativity in our community and being a place that showcases it. So that's the first part for us, is about active participation. The second part, next slide, is about social bridging. We all know that we live in a really divided world, and when we were undergoing this revolution, we knew we were going to change who we were participating with. But we decided that we didn't want to switch from having older people to having younger people, or having people who look like this to people who look like that. Instead, we decided that we wanted to focus on creating experiences that bridge different communities and create a place where people are encountering and meeting people who are not like them. If anybody here has read the book Bowling Alone by the political scientist Robert Putnam, he talks about building social capital and the fact that there are two ways to do it. There's bonding capital with people who are like you, and bridging capital with people who are not like you. And in his book, he traces the decline of civility and civic engagement in this country to the decline of these bridging experiences. And so we decided, okay, the way we are going to do this is not by targeting a particular audience, but by being the place that brings together people from very different walks of life. And that means, can you go to the next slide? Do you need a minute back there to like switch the remote and then we could just do this? Try it again. Okay, cool. Let's see, I'll try going back. Looks not, okay. Oh, okay, great. All right. This is magic. I'm hitting buttons. They're just doing something in the back. So that means when we create programming, we deliberately bring together people, artists, and communities from different walks of life. That can be opera singers and ukulele players, in this case, knitters and graffiti artists. And we know that each of these two people has their own constituency and their own audience who are actually going to have a worse experience in some ways having this mashed up program than if they were just going to a knitting event or just going to a graffiti event. But we also know that the creative tension and the friction that comes in putting all of these edges together in the same space creates opportunities for really interesting collaborations, both between artists who get to know each other across difference and between visitors who come from different pieces of the community and are connecting through the experience they have with us. The third part of our revolution is about how we do our work, and it's about the idea just of, oh, it was just working. We were having such a great time with this machine. And can you go to the next slide? Okay, the third part for us is just about fearless experimentation, and just the basic idea that the only way we're going to be successful is if we keep challenging ourselves to try new things, to adapt to the way that our world is changing. So that's it for us: active participation, social bridging, and fearless experimentation. Now let me show you what just 1 year of this kind of revolution did for us. I'm really hoping. Okay, go ahead. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what things looked like the year that I showed up at our museum. It was really interesting to see Max's piece about the percentage. So that year we had about 17,000 visitors. We had 800 people on our busiest day, and you can see that our cash position was quite poor. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what happened in 1 year. We more than doubled our attendance. Our busiest day skyrocketed, and we went from 5 years in the red to building up a surplus for the first time. And when you look at the, yeah, all right. And when you look at our attendance now, in a town of 60,000 people, we have about 45,000 visits this year. So this is the year that's now ending, the next year after this. And we're really able to be stable, not by bringing in some fancy show, not by building some fancy building, but by changing the way that we engage with our community. So what I want to do with the next 15 minutes or so is just share with you 5 of the things I've learned from undergoing this revolution and how they've kind of changed my practice. But first I want to note this, which is not shown in a slide, which has been the best part of this revolution, which has been the way that our community has changed its perception of the museum. I can't tell you how often I'm walking down the street, or recently the most mind-blowing one was at the DMV, the most soul-crushing place in the world, and the woman behind the counter said, "You work at the museum, right? I never used to go there, and now I can't believe how often I'm there and how much it's changed my life." And it's embarrassing and completely humbling and amazing when that happens, and it's the best part of my job. But this wasn't easy to do, and the first part of it that I really want to share is about the fact that a revolution is a risk. And it does not happen in concentric circles, and here's what I mean by that. So let's say you have a program, right? And this is sort of your pool of resources that you have. You got some audience, you got some money, you got some facility, and you decide we want to grow. Okay, so you decide you're going to get bigger, and who's involved? This is really nice evolutionary growth, and I would say that this is not a risk because the center of your programming, ooh, now we're just going crazy. Can you guys go back? Oh. Okay, this is the interpretive math part of the program. Let's see if I can click it. Okay, I just clicked that. Oh, then you click that. Okay, let's stop. Okay, great. So the center of the programming, I was already nervous, you know, like, oh, what are theater people going to think if I do this math thing? Is it going to be confusing? No, it's going to be totally confusing. So the center of the programming with this kind of growth has not changed. You didn't have to piss anybody off in that purple circle to get to the yellow. Okay, so here's what happened to our institution instead. Okay, I'm going to try and click. Okay, that didn't work. Why don't you try and click? Okay, great. So we started with this group of people, and now our resources have changed. Can you click? Okay, great. And we've moved over here. And there are 2 things I want to point out about this. First, the security side of this. We did not lose a whole lot of people in changing what we were doing. There was not a lot of that purple circle that decided to walk away in terms of members and donors. And even though what we're doing now is very different from what we were doing before, most of the people who are already engaged with the museum are still engaged in our site. But here's the risk part, which is the center of our programming now is outside of that whole purple circle. To be able to reach this new group of resources, this new community, we didn't say we're going to recenter at the edge of who we currently have. We said we are going to do something that is completely outside of where we currently are. And that's the risk, is that you're stepping off a ledge, believing that there is something better on the other side. And when I've seen institutions that get very incremental and nervous about making change, it's because of this, because they're afraid of pissing off the people they already have, who are, by the way, the only people they're hearing from at that time. Those are the people who are complaining, those are the people who are cheering. And whenever somebody says to me, I'm nervous about losing those traditional audience that I have, I always ask them to consider the opportunity cost of the people who are outside, who don't even know yet that they're going to be part of it, who you're not hearing from because they turned away a long time ago. There are a lot of people who came in. All right, yeah, I'm excited about them. We had a lot of visitors in my first few months at the museum who would come in and say, God, I always felt like this place was so cold and uninviting, and now I feel like it's cool. You know, those people were they weren't showing up in our surveys. They were not showing up anywhere until we shifted what we were doing. One of the things that's been really interesting, I think, about this is how it changes also in some ways that you really wouldn't expect. So this program is emblematic of some of the change that we've done. So we have this program called Pop-Up Museum, where we partner with different venues in our community, and we create really lightweight museums that just exist for a couple hours. Here's how it works. You create a theme. In this case, the theme was F My Ex. It was the night before Valentine's Day. You have a venue, in this case it was a bar. People bring objects on that theme, so people were bringing objects from breakups. They handwrite a label for them. Boom, you make an exhibit, a museum that just exists for a couple of hours. It's a great thing. You could do it, you know. So this was a phenomenally successful program for us. For this whole new world of people, but it was also one where we heard from some of our traditional members that this was emblematic of what they thought was really getting screwed up about the museum, that they felt that we were not just being irreverent, but that we were being offensive in what we were doing. And I learned that despite what Sesame Street might say, F is just not a letter you should use on its own in programming. So the woman who runs this program wrote a blog post on our website about some of the comments that we gotten and some of the controversy between reaching a new audience and engaging people you've been with for a long time. And one of the comments we got on the blog, can you go to the next slide, was from this guy who had a really interesting comment. He said, I'm more like the stodgy traditional museum supporter than the audiences you're trying to reach, but I really support your outreach and attempts to involve new communities. It's precisely because of that outreach that I became a member last year. There was no reason to do so before since the museum was doing nothing. I don't know about that. I still have little occasion to go to the museum, but I'm willing to support it as an important community resource. And what's really interesting to me about this guy is this is a guy who is identifying as a purple circle guy, but he was not in the purple circle at all. And so I think actually what he's saying is, you have a different role in the community. I'm thinking about you in a different way now. It's sort of what Max was talking about shifting from this idea of being consumer-driven to thinking about philanthropy, and we have a different value proposition, and we're able to garner some resources because of it. Okay. The second thing I want to say, especially when you're starting a revolution, is one of the fastest ways to screw it up is to try and focus on too many things. And I want to give you an example. So when I came, one of the things that happened at our museum was we heard from a lot of people, God, that building is so cold and bureaucratic. You know, it just really feels like an office building. So one of the directives I gave to staff was, okay, let's make this museum more welcoming. One of the two things we have to do this year is make the museum just feel more welcoming. And can you go to the next slide? So I walk in one day and I see this, and we'd had these chairs donated, and I see this sign that somebody's put up, an intern, that says, roving armchair tour, sit back, relax, and enjoy the art. My background's as an exhibit designer, and my first thought when I looked at this sign was, this belongs in a preschool. This is not visually, appropriate for a museum. We should change this. But then I realized, no, Nina, what you said to people was, we have to make this museum more welcoming, and this is a good attempt at doing that. Don't censor this. And here's what we saw happen. We saw people sitting and talking about the art. We saw people scooting around, because these chairs have wheels. And you know what? If I had said, we can't have this sign, this never would have happened. I had a lot of donors in the beginning, and still actually, who felt like, God, the museum is getting so junky. Can you go to the next slide? Why do you have these awful couches everywhere that you got off the side of the street? And I said, we need to make this museum more welcoming, therefore we need couches. If you want to buy me a better couch, that's fine. And eventually when we raise money, yes, we'll get nicer couches. But we have to start with the couch. We can't start by saying we're going to be welcoming and raising money and then get a great looking couch. The couch is what changes the way people see the museum, and then it's going to change what they do. Okay, the next piece of this for us has become really important is that often people see what we're doing as chaotic, as loosey-goosey, and we have just been trying so much to focus on how do we build structures and frameworks under what we're doing to be able to keep it going, to be able to talk about it intelligently, to be able to keep making it happen in our community. So for example, we do a lot in terms of building from our community, their assets, their needs. We think a lot about how we design meetings so that people like children can give their ideas for what should be in our space. This is actually a kid suggesting that we should have the Titanic in front of the museum, which was an interesting idea that we're not going to work on. But I feel like one of the things I've learned from my friends at the United Way is that every great community organizing experience generates a really boring photograph of people who are sitting around tables talking to each other. But we've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you create community advisory groups that are lightweight, that can really work with you to support what you're trying to do. We also think a lot about what the logic is behind what we do. This is, I think, a pretty typical arts logic model. You know, it's simple. Go back. Stay there. Thank you. So we got really interested in this idea of a theory of change, which is basically a way to be able to demonstrate the logic of how the activities you do have the outcomes that you want, which create the impacts you want to see in the community. And again, as I say, I think this is kind of a sloppy one that we often kind of softly ignore, but is sort of the way that we talk about what we do. I think this is a problem for two reasons. First of all, it's a problem with funders because they're getting more sophisticated and asking us to really demonstrate how the programming we does generates world peace or whatever it might be. But I think it's also a problem with staff, because if you have a lofty mission or a vision statement, and then you have these programs, and there is not a clear line between them, how does a staff member know whether they're going in the right direction? How do they know how to evaluate what they're doing against the mission in some way? So we developed our own theory of change. You can go to the next slide now, thank you. It's pretty simple. It just has these three parts. The first is about participation, the idea that when we invite people to participate, it empowers them as cultural agents and creative producers, and that makes them more connected to art and history in their lives. The second part's about social bridging. By bringing people together across different communities, we generate awareness and understanding that creates a more generous and cohesive society. And then finally, this idea that experimentation breeds innovation, which allows us to adapt and thrive. This kind of logic model, one that's not based on we do exhibitions or we do events, but is instead based on how we do our work, has really allowed all of our staff members and our board members to have a common language and to have something to assess against when we think about this. It also allows when people say, why are you doing this community participation stuff? It's just a party, or it's just screwing around, to say, no, this is why we're doing it, and here's how we measure it. Okay, go to the next slide. Thank you. I'm realizing maybe my numbers are off also. More math confusion. So how many people here are from a small or mid-sized organization? Okay, awesome. I love running a small museum. My museum has a budget of $1 million. And one of the things that I'm always confused about when I work with other people from small and mid-sized organizations is how often it seems that we look at the big guys as the pinnacle of what we're trying to be, that we're trying to professionalize in a way that is about being more like them. I think this is very phenomenally strange. If you go to the next slide, you know, if you ran a coffee shop, if you decided, I'm going to open a local coffee shop, you would never say, you know what we should do? We should really try and be just like Starbucks, right? Your unique market advantage is that you are not Starbucks. You're something more personal, more idiosyncratic. And I think that no matter what size you are, whether you're a huge place or a small place, you have to exploit what really can be done at your scale. And I think that actually big museums and big organizations do this pretty well. I think small organizations have this complex that keeps them from really exploiting what can be done in a small space. For us, being small means things like being really personal in how we thank people. It means things like, go to the next slide. When an artist comes to us and says, I would like to give people sledgehammers and let them pound metal aluminum fish to make a giant sculpture together, we can look at the liability thing. We don't have a lawyer. We don't talk to anybody about it. We just say, yeah, that sounds good. Let's just do it. Go to the next slide. Oh, when Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens came to me and said, we want to do this performance artist sleepover, and we're mired in all this red tape with these other institutions, I just say, come on down. My first year, we used to say we had a policy which was no money, no bullshit. You know, we don't have any money to pay you, but we're not going to put you all stuck in this red tape either. Let's just make it happen. And that also means for us, we can be really opportunistic. If you go to the next slide. So if somebody calls us the day of an event and says, hey, I see you're having a kinetic art event, and I have this tandem bike that's attached to a couch that has lights and plays music. Can I come down and drive it around? We can just say yes. So, you know, I don't care what scale you're working at. I hugely admire things like what Max is doing in Dallas, and it's right for his scale. But whatever scale you are, don't apologize for the fact, at least in our case, that we're not in San Francisco or we're not in New York. We are going to be the best damn $1 million museum we can be for our community, and we're going to do things that make those bigger museums drool because it requires so much levels of bureaucracy to get these kinds of things to happen. Okay. And the last thing I want to say about this revolutionary stuff is that you can't give up. I just had my 2-year review with our executive committee, and they asked me at the end, you know, what do you need from us in the coming year? And I said, well, you know, we're in a place right now where we could actually get a little less interesting. We've got some money built up, we've got good press, we've got goodwill in the community, and I know there are some people who are upset, and we could spend some time and some money appeasing them. But I said to them, and I also said to our staff, you know, I don't want us to do that. I want us to all challenge ourselves to keep going in this direction that we're doing because it's really important work that's happening, and we can't waste time going back to smooth things out. And I know that a lot of people here in this room are managing directors or artistic directors, and I want to particularly say to you from a leadership perspective that there's a huge opportunity once you have been able to take creative risk to figure out ways to make that available to others. There's a model that, thank you, I learned from a brilliant friend of mine, Beck Tench, who's at the Museum of Life and Science in North Carolina. And she was hired there to be a risk taker. And she said she realized quickly that what she needed to be successful was somebody to make space for her. Go ahead and click. Great. And that this person, go ahead and click again, was somebody who was going to give her just the cover, the room, to be able to take the risk she needed to take creatively. For me, that was my board, you know, walking in as somebody into a huge crisis. The fact that they basically said, here, we're giving you the keys and we're looking away, was amazing because they didn't do that and then micromanage us to death, right? They said, okay, we are going to take a risk on you. You know, this is the chance we have. We're going to give you the space to do it. And what I've learned as a manager now is that I now get really excited about the opportunity. Go ahead and click again. Yeah, perfect. As a risk taker, to be the person who's now making space for other people, whether they're staff members, whether they're volunteers, whether they're board members, to take risks themselves. And every once in a while, I'll go back, or you could, yeah, okay, just stay, cool. Every once in a while, I'll talk to an artistic director or an ED who will say to me, gosh, you know, we're doing great stuff. I have a really honed team, but I feel like all the most creative ideas still have to come from my desk. And when I hear that, I kind of think in my head, this is a person who's not yet ready to focus more on this space-making side. And I would say that if you really care about the work that you're doing continuing beyond you, you have to shift your mindset so that you can make the space for other people to take it in directions you would never believe. And right? I want to give you an example of this, which has been so surprising to me, and it's at this place called Evergreen Cemetery. So one of the strangest parts of my job is that I run a historic cemetery. My museum owns this cemetery. Every once in a while there's a burial, but it's one of the oldest, it's a very strange part of my job. It's one of the oldest public cemeteries in California. It's a place where Chinese railroad workers are buried, where pioneers, Civil War vets, it's all over the place. It's really wonderful. But when I came to Santa Cruz and I came to this museum, it was not a wonderful place. It was a really dangerous place. Vines had overgrown everything. You could not see the gravestones. It was a really great place to camp, to drop trash, to smash headstones, and particularly really thriving heroin market in the cemetery. And so at the time, it was just sort of this disaster zone for us. And all I did was had a conversation with a board member at the Homeless Service Center, which was right around the corner. And we talked about the cemetery, and we came up with this idea that maybe we could do something together. And we got their volunteer manager and the volunteers who work on the cemetery to get together and to think about something. And now for the last year and a half, we've had this crew of homeless volunteers and museum volunteers who go out every week to do restoration work on the cemetery together. They have uncovered incredible things. They literally almost every week are discovering new plots and gravestones that were covered over in the detritus and the neglect that happened over the last several years. They're making it a beautiful, safe, wonderful historic site. They also are becoming cultural ambassadors for it in this very strange way. So if you go out to Evergreen now on a Saturday, there will be drunk guys there, but there will be drunk guys who, as you're walking around, will say, hey, did you know that was the first teacher in Santa Cruz County? I mean, they're the weirdest docent corps I have ever worked with, and they are self-elected. The other thing they do, though, is they call and they say, hey, somebody threw a whole bunch of trash here, we decided to clean it up. Or we've got this woman who's homeless who's been planting daffodils in a certain part of the cemetery, which has been amazing. And I have to say that for me, yes, there's an amazing part of this project that's about people who you'd never think being cultural ambassadors, really stewarding this historic site. But the other amazing part that's happening is about social bridging. I mean, I have had 80-year-old women who volunteer at the museum who say to me, this is the first time I've had a one-on-one conversation with a homeless person, and it has changed the way I see this issue in our community. That is the kind of work that I want to do. I don't care that much what people learn about art or history when they're at our museum. What I do care about is how art and history and how their experiences with us catalyze opportunities in our community for people to see creativity as the basis for solving big problems that affect all of us. And I often go back to this amazing talk that there's this mathematician named Dick Hamming, he's dead now, completely brilliant, complete narcissist, just like a great artist. And he gave this really wonderful talk at Bell Labs in the 80s that was about the question of what does it take to do significant work, and in his case he was talking about in science. What separates a Nobel Prize winning scientist from a scientist who is really smart and energetic but doesn't make it? And one of the things he talked about observing as a scientist was how many people he knew who were not doing important work and did not think that the work they were doing was going to lead to an important problem. And I think that no matter what revolution you want to be on, you've got to find an important problem. Selling tickets is not an important problem. It's a problem that has to be solved, but it's not the problem that should get you up in the morning. And I don't really care what revolution you want to be on. When I think about the places I admire, go to the next slide, places like the Elsewhere Collective in Greensboro, where they decided to take a thrift store and make it a center of creative engagement in a community. Or go to the next slide, a place like Streb Labs, where they said, you know what, screw the dance elite, we are going to open a place that is a garage, that is open to the public and engage people with dance in new ways. Or a place, go ahead to the next slide, like Busboys and Poets, where they said, you know what, we're going to take poetry and beer and turn it into an opportunity to fight racism in our community. All these people are working on different important problems in really interesting ways. And so all I want to do today is just beseech you and encourage you to find that important problem that is most relevant for you and to keep going and start that revolution in your own world. So thank you, and thank you so much to whoever in the back was doing that. We should stay, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right.
Thanks, Nina. That's great.
So as you've gathered, we now have time for a Q&A. Thank you both so much.
Sure.
I mean, the idea of Bobby, who goes to the museum every single day and just communes with the art and the impact that has on him, and the idea of the bridging that you're doing, the 80-year-old volunteer who has never spoken to a homeless person and has her life changed by participating in a project at your museum or a piece of property that you own. It's remarkable. Large institution, small organization, different aspects of flexibility that you have at your disposal. I want to know if anyone out here has a question for these two wonderful people. Yes.
What are you going to do with the data, Max?
The question is, what are we going to do with the
They're
data?
gonna sell it. No,
No, we're not going to sell it. We're going to put it all live, free on the web. And the premise about that is that we expect dozens of other museums to join into a free membership program. And the really exciting thing is when the Los Angeles County Museum of Art joins us, we'll be able to have our visitors use points in LA and have them use points here. So it's not a revolution, but it's definitely a new commercial paradigm of free participation is what makes people happy. And I think the data points are going to help us with funders who want to know how relevant are you, what constituencies you're reaching, what's the demographic, how much does it attach to the catchment in your metro area, how are people spending their time, who are they in respect to their educational level. So that's critical for us because we are philanthropically driven. We are a educational charity, and we need to start acting like it and stop pretending that we're treasure houses that can charge our way to solvency. So that's the plan. That's the plan.
Other questions? Over here.
This is just more of a comment. Both of your presentations reminded me of something that one of my teachers, Eric N., said in graduate school, and it seemed like such a radical thing to say at the time, but he said, you know, we're social workers. Artists are social workers, and if we think that we're doing otherwise or in it for other reasons, then we're sort of missing the point. And I think I see that in really interesting ways in both of your work, so thank you.
You know, it's interesting. We've been talking with our board, and when I go out and talk in the community, we talk about ourselves as a community development organization. And when new people come onto our board, I always have this conversation with them about how they relate to the public that we serve. And I say, look, if you're on the board of the food bank, you don't expect to be in line and get soup. You expect to support the work that we're doing for hungry people in the community. And similarly, if you're on the board of our museum, you are not the prototypical visitor. You are helping support the fact that there are all these people who are engaging, and we should all be thrilled to see the diversity of people who are involved. I think often I see arts institutions that get hampered by the fact that there are board members who represent a very narrow niche of the audience but wield a lot of control based on their own personal preferences of how they like to experience the space. And we've gotten really rigorous both about making sure board members see themselves in supporting that community development side, and also that nobody, staff included, is allowed to say, well, I really like X. You know, we always try and start from research or from things that are coming from visitors as opposed to from our own experience.
Well, thank you both for being here. I was very inspired by both of you in different ways, and thank you for TCG for bringing them here in the end. I have a question for both of you who have taken serious measures, even globally, to change the perception of what your institution provides as far as value to something that's more social, something that's more community development based, as opposed to, I wish I was more familiar with museums, but in theater we have artistic directors, and often the reputation of our theater is on their shoulders artistically. So in fact, what we provide and what a lot of people want to know from us is, what plays do you do? And when we talk about the quality of theaters, we talk about the quality of their actors or the quality of their plays a lot of the time. So have you ever thought to yourself, or has anybody ever asked you, what about the quality of the art? And are the attendees really change? Is the impact of all this increasing their understanding and appreciation of art, or is it just to be more social?
Well, it won't surprise you that I have a somewhat more dreary view of this than Nina. That is to say, I am responsible for a collection of tens of thousands of works of art by some of the greatest artists in history, and I'm very actively and focused on that primarily. This to me is essential, but so is the other part. So is the assumption that our curators are doing the best possible cutting-edge research, that they're published in journal articles that are peer-reviewed, that we have a show right now from the British Museum, which is the first major show they've sent to the US, that we're exporting exhibitions overseas. So we have that enormous concatenation of responsibilities around quality and authority, which I won't give up on, but I consider this an indispensable part of making that worthwhile to the people who live here.
In our case, this is a huge concern that comes up from some of our more traditional visitors, and I think that It's interesting how you framed the question of, are people really engaging with and learning from the art, or is this just something social? And I would actually flip it and say, are we really making our community a better place, or are we just having some nice exhibits? And I think that what I see is that traditional practices get a pass when we do new initiatives, especially if they're focused on diversity or engagement. We have so many evaluative requirements put on those that we don't put on the things that we've always done. There's a kind of classic thing in art museums about how many seconds does somebody spend looking at a piece of art. And what we see is that the dwell time people have, the amount of time they spend engaging with art, having conversations about art, has hugely increased because of the participatory things we're doing. And it's interesting that some people say, but they're not having that contemplative experience. And I say, well, did that contemplative experience really exist, or is that a nice idea you have about what you think a museum should be? I have no illusions about the fact that you could have two 65-year-old well-dressed women who are walking through a museum talking about lunch, but since they're doing it in a quiet way and they're looking in a certain way, you're going to say, oh, that's a check-off of a traditional experience, versus somebody who's really hands-on making something but engaging with work through it. I think we have to have really consistency around how we measure so that we're not giving certain things a pass that we've always done without questioning whether those are really having the impact we think they're having or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hi there, this is a question for Nina, but it's inspired by something that Max said. Nina, do you see your museum as a tourist destination? And to put this another way, who is your community? We're from Houston, this is something we ask ourselves a lot.
Sure. Yeah, so Santa Cruz is a tourist town, but we actually don't focus at all on tourists. So we're very similar in that both of us, I think, feel that the way to really engage people sincerely, both on a content perspective, but also, I think, financially, is to have a long-term relationship with them. And so when I came, I basically said, look, we can't afford tourists. And if you're a tourist and you come once and you have a nice experience, that's fine. But you're not going to be the kind of person we want, which is somebody who comes once and then says, hey, what if you did a fire festival? Or hey, I happen to sculpt watermelons or whatever. And then they get more and more involved with the museum. And so we really focus on it being a locally based experience. And for us, what we've done is, in terms of defining communities, we started out by saying, who are the people in our community who, for whom where there's a huge market potential because they don't have cultural experiences kind of for them. But then what we've done is gotten really specific about particular affinity communities of interest. We're actually really firm with ourselves about not defining communities demographically. Instead, we talk about, people who love to skateboard, people who do X, and then we map out what are the assets and needs of that community and how can we program based on that. And so that's an iterative thing we do in terms of community mapping with some community advisory boards. And the thing that's gotten easier is as more people get involved, we have to do less generalized outreach, and we can think more clearly about where's the targeted outreach we want to do, who's not raising their hand and showing up, and how do we then focus some effort there, as opposed to saying, well, in the beginning it was like, shit, we just, we need to get broadly people in our community actually interested in this place.
You mentioned community advisory boards. Can you talk a little bit about community advisory boards, how you use them, how the different ways you might use them, how many, and how they're engaged?
Yeah, so I'd seen a lot of museums where their community advisory boards had become these onerous beasts, or where you'd have the Latino one and the Asian one, and you just have so many different things going on. And so I stole this model from a guy in Dublin who runs a place called the Science Gallery, where they have what they call the Leonardo Group, which in his case is 75 people who get together 4 times a year to brainstorm on a really particular topic brought to them by the museum. So this is a science and art gallery, so they do things like, okay, we're going to do something on oscillation. What should we be doing with that? And getting all these ideas from those members of that group. So we have this group called C3, the Creative Community Committee, and for us it's an expanding list. It has about 100 people on it now, and every other month we do a really targeted meeting. So it might be something like a meeting about where else in the county should we be going and engaging, or it might be something like, we're revising our mission statement and doing a workshop around that. Different subsets of that group of 100 will opt in depending on what they're interested in. But we always focus on, it's an hour and a half, it's evening, it's beer, and it's really focused on things that we can then do something with. We don't ever want, and we do this with board committees too, we don't have any standing committee meetings because, it just doesn't, we want to make sure things are sufficiently project-based that we can actually be accountable to those groups, that then we move forward. There are some certain groups, like a teen advisory group, that have gotten more regular, and that has more to do with how we want to be more deeply engaged with a particular constituency than it does have to do with kind of how we want to do advisory groups overall.
And I would just say we're starting to use the DMA Friends, the 13,000 people, to start conversations with them as individuals, because we can email people and they'll receive it with their first name, and it completely changes the approach with social media, connecting with people.
Yeah.
So I love free as much as everybody else does, but in the theater, as opposed to museums, we have a value proposition challenge, which is that for looking around this room, anywhere from 40 to 85% of our income is ticket revenue. Can you solve that for us?
Here we go. So I might just, so the Association of Art Museum Directors, this group of 200 museums, we analyze our data every year. It's true. It's about 4%, 4.1% of our revenue is from general admissions. Whereas in your world, in the world in general, the performing arts, it's as you say, 40, 60, 70, 80%. It's very hard for us to make an extensible match between what we're doing and what you're doing from an earned revenue perspective. And I think what we do that's in common with you is special exhibitions. So we have multiple special exhibitions a year. We spend $3-4 million in some years staging these. We sell tickets. But with the one example I would cite that might be slightly germane in terms of you're giving away free seats as incentives here and there, we had a Marc Chagall show that closed just recently. And we emailed 10,000 at that time friends and said, here's the question, you have enough points to go to the Chagall show for free, why don't you come redeem them? So we had a very big turnout over the course of a couple of weeks, and many of them brought friends who bought tickets, that is, people who weren't members. So there are ways perhaps of incentivizing through social media, getting new audiences engaged instead of season tickets, which we know have ups and downs, and it's just one example of a way to manipulate the system.
I would just note that there are other parts of the museum world that are not, that are much more earned income based than art museums are. One of the museums I admire most is the Pittsburgh Children's Museum, which has actually increased to be, I think, about 65 or 70% earned income. But they are really clear, I think, similar to what we're talking about, that they have a philanthropic proposition of what their value is in the community about supporting childhood. There are also places like the Monterey Bay Aquarium where they've actually increased their ticket sales and ticket price at the same time as they give away more free tickets. So they basically realized for our tourists, they're price insensitive, they'll pay $40 to come to the aquarium, but if we want to build a generation of California, Chicano visitors, we need to do that in a different way, and we're going to have a different pricing model for that. So they use that higher, they tax tourists to be able to do more for their own community. So I think there are other ways to play in that space too.
Can both of you talk about just how your staff structuring changed with these initiatives?
Well, in our case, our development department remained the same behemoth size, but a lot of them switched over now to doing research on donor prospects at a higher level, which previously we had a smaller coterie of researchers in development. And we've moved several of them onto the floor. So they're now meeting people, they're greeting them, they're learning about our visitors as individuals, and they're soliciting them to join as partners, as paying members, if they're willing and able to. That's been one change. The other, I mentioned security. They're now greeting people in formal uniforms and are very excited about incentivizing visitors to get points. And they're much more alert in the galleries, protecting priceless works of art, because they're actually talking and looking at people as opposed to waiting when their break might come. So those are the two primary changes for us.
For us, we're very small, and I would say the primary change for us has been saying everything we do is going to be in partnership with community members. So for example, the people who run our programs, they are brilliant creative producers in their own right, but I always say to them, look, your job is like 10% creative production, 90% bringing together and facilitating all of the community partners with whom we're going to create these events. So we do 2 big events per month that each will have 20 to 100 partners involved. And so the person who runs those events, who absolutely could be the head of education in another museum, instead what she's doing is really about kind of festival curation / cheerleading / helping these partners figure out how they can be part of it, and that's a very different role. And so one of the things we've actually been looking at is doing more cross-training with organizations like United Way as opposed to with arts organizations, and getting away from this idea that we have the idea, we have the content, but also retuning that quality meter to being about how do we create the framework that will create a quality experience out of a rock band of 12-year-olds and a quilting association and an amazing professional artist, without saying one person here is higher value than the others. So a lot of it's about community organizing directly.
One of my trustees is here. I would love to get her the microphone if that's possible. Who knows what she's going to say?
Thanks, Max. That was a good way to get the microphone. Actually, one of the things that I would love if you would comment a little bit is about the collaboration with the Dallas Theater Center that DMA had on Red, and what was some of the feedback you got on that. For me, it was a wonderful way to enhance the experience of both the art and the show, but I was wondering what other feedback
Thanks,
you got
Julie.
from it.
Well, next door, the Wiley presented Red a few months ago, and when I learned that, I approached Kevin Moriarty to say it would be fun to think about Rothko's work through works in our collection. And I invited the conservator who was at the Whitney Museum, which I used to direct, who I had stolen from the Menil collection in Texas, where she was restoring the Rothko Chapel for many, many years. So she came, and we had 2 events really behind the scenes. We had one for stagehands and actors to train them really in Rothko's working method and his psychology and all of the features of his personality. And then we had a public event where we had the actors and producers and directors and Carol talk a bit about it. So what was exciting for us was using works of art in the collection to connect with the theater complement and see ways in which, as a district, as an arts district, we can constantly be tumbling the stones about how that adjacency of the creative impulse can inform our collective and respective missions. And we're very excited. We do things with the opera as well. We're working on the possibility of putting together a stage set for the opera through a commissioned artist. We work very closely with the public high school down the street, the Booker T. Washington, where my son is a brilliant young junior in the film cluster, making films. And we work basically with everybody on the street, the Nasher Sculpture Center, and I think that's part of the fun of being in an arts district that we're trying to make particularly relevant here and elsewhere.
Can I make a couple comments about working with other arts organizations and theater in particular? We just started a program with the Hewlett Foundation, actually. There was a Wallace convening in San Francisco maybe a year and a half ago about active audience participation. And I always remember hearing from some individual artists who were there who were really concerned that they were being edged out of being at the center, or at least having a voice in what was shifting around audience engagement. And so one of the things we're pretty excited about that we're doing now is a participatory performing artist in residence program at our museum, because one of the things we'd found was that when we were working with community partners to co-create participatory events, that honestly it was much more uncomfortable in a lot of cases for performing artists to work in a way that was really community engaged. Obviously there are people for whom that's their whole practice, but in broad strokes it was harder for them to see themselves in that kind of space. And so we've really enjoyed now working with some theater and some musicians to really look at how we can do things that are in line with our participatory and bridging goals, but really service and support the work that they're trying to do. But I would also note that we intentionally don't partner a lot with other arts organizations in our community, because we feel like if what we want to do is really make art pervasive throughout our community, then the organizations that we have to partner with are the organizations that are in some way aligned but much further outside than the symphony or the Santa Cruz Shakespeare. All of those are great groups, and we're happy to help them out or to work with them sometimes, but we're much more interested in what a partnership looks like with the Resource Center for Nonviolence or the Homeless Center or a civics group than we are in working with an arts organization, just in terms of expanding where art goes in our community.
That's great. We're actually out of time. I just want to recall something that Deborah Cullinan said earlier that had something to do with the idea of both and, we need to, and I'm listening to the two of you, and your organizations are so different in so many ways, and yet it seems to me the fact that both of you exist and both of you are doing the kinds of work that you're doing is making the entire museum ecology stronger. Yes,
Sure.
thank you. And I say that in part because we have similar dynamics overall in our theater community, which, small organizations, large organizations, medium-sized, people experimenting in different ways in different kinds of communities. And I think sometimes there's a sense that one way of doing might be better than another way, or the whole world within 20 years is going to be no more institutions and only. But in fact, I think it can all exist and feed each other. And it's really clear, listening to the two of you today, that that's what's happening and what can happen for museums. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Teresa. Thank you.
Come along. Okay, well, I just want to thank them again. And speaking of the Wallace Foundation, I would like to thank the Wallace Foundation for their sponsorship of this particular assembly. And I would like to thank all of our funders. We have had so many fantastic supporters of this event, so thank you, thank you, thank you. So at this point, I know that some of you are needing to go and catch planes and so on, but I just want to take a minute to extend some more thanks to people who have been so instrumental in the development of this conference and its success. I want to acknowledge our volunteers here in Dallas. Volunteers, stand if you will. Volunteers, stand. Also, another group that I'd like to acknowledge is the TCG board. I mentioned them earlier in the conference. They are invaluable to us. And finally, the TCG staff. They work incredibly hard all year long. Actually, staff who are in the room, can you stand or wave or make your presence known in some way? Thank you. Our entire staff is involved in one way or the other in the conference. I do want to make special recognition of our conference producing team, and that would be Dafina McMillan, Devin Berkshire, and Gus Schulenberg. And now, before I say school's out for summer, I want to leave you with just 3 thoughts. One is the conference is ending now, but it's a long way from over because we have Conference 2.0, we have the TCG Circle, from our teleconferences to our Diversity and Inclusion Institute, which will continue. We are constantly looking for ways to connect you and keep these conversations going. But we need your help. We're busy and we're stressed and we're strained, and that is why it's so important to reach out to each other and learn, do, teach all year long. As Keenan reminded us, we are reflections of each other. So let's do that. Learn, do, teach. Second thing, I'm walking away from this conference with a renewed sense of both play and purpose. We wrestled with challenges of financial adaptation. We took action towards creating a more diverse and inclusive theater field. And in sessions large and small, we connected with the purpose and the vision of our founders like Adrian Hall and Luis Valdez and Laurie McCants and Lou Bellamy, and with the passion and the poetry of artists like Ayat Akhtar, David Henry Wong, Kardad Svich, and Will Power. It feels good to be reminded that theater really can and must change the world, but this was also a conference of food trucks, banjo songs, and where a goat, Barney, and a buried truth took over the Winspear lawn for a site-specific performance, reminding me how important it is that we reconnect with that sense of play. So let's try to keep those twin feelings of play and purpose with us as we return to our overscheduled lives and our overflowing inboxes. And 3, get out your pens or phones and write these dates down. November 8th to 10th, please join us in New York for the Fall Forum on Governance. That is a weekend event that is specially for trustees and theater leaders, and we really get into the nitty-gritty of some important topics for the field. Please join us then. June 19th to 21st, the National Conference is back in San Diego. We want to see you there because the truth is nothing inspires our work more than being in the same room with all of you. So from across the country and increasingly across the world, we reunite once a year, emerge re-energized to fulfill our vision of a better world for theater, a better world because of theater. So school may be out for summer, but that bell will ring again soon. Thank you, and class dismissed.